Hello, everyone. Good day to you all, and welcome to this Pandemic Legacy Q&A. We are here with designers Matt Leacock and Rob Davio to talk about Pandemic Legacy Seasons 1, 2, and 0. Welcome, Matt and Rob.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Hello.
Now, before we get into this, I want to let all the viewers know that this is intended to be a spoiler-free discussion. There might be some passing references to the setting and the start of each individual game, but we're not going to get into any really deep specifics about the mid-campaign story, the rules, or gameplay elements. So a secondary request too is for those of you in chat, please do be respectful to those who haven't experienced any of the games. No comments or questions that contain any spoilers either. So we want to make sure that everybody can go into the game fresh and enjoy it as it is. Speaking of questions though, feel free to ask any questions you might have in the Twitch chat during the conversation. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat and add any into the discussion as it progresses. So why don't we get started? Matt and Rob, why don't you give us an overview of the soon-to-be released Pandemic Legacy Season 0?
You want to take that, Matt?
Lead it off?
I'll lead it off. Pandemic Legacy Season 0, even though it has a 0, it's the third game in the series. It's a 0 because it's prequel. Season 1 was set in the year it came out, 2015. Season 2 was set 71 years later. And now we went back to 1962 to do a Cold War spy thriller, which basically is espionage and medical drama and a light bit of bio warfare. We wanted to go back and look at where this all started. There wasn't many places we could go after the end of the world, which is not a spoiler. Season 2 starts and it's the end of the world. And so we wanted to do something that was a little bit different. If the first season was sort of a high adventure, almost summer blockbuster, and season 2 is a post-apocalyptic film, we wanted to kind of go back and do a 60s spy drama. And this is what we cooked up.
All right. What's different in terms of mechanics, not just in settings, but what makes the three of them different, and particularly Season 0?
We try to do a little something different in each of them so that they have their own feel. Season 1 starts where you basically just need to know basic pandemic, and we kind of take you on this journey. 2 is more of an exploration of a new world. You start as sort of an everyman and try to figure out what happened. And 3, we take you back to 62, and we tried a number of ways to kind of integrate the game into a Cold War spy thriller. One of the things that's immediately apparent when you start is that you're not dealing with disease. You're dealing with the situation. You're a brand new agent, and you're fresh out of medical school, and you're sort of learning who you can trust and who you can't. One of the things you need to deal with is there's Soviet agents who are trying to blow your cover and trying to interfere with you. Given that there's no disease on the board, one of the big things in a typical pandemic game is that you're trying to meld cards in order to cure a disease. So we don't have that at the beginning of this game. You'll know that right away coming out of the box. Instead, you meld cards to assemble covert teams. And they're one of the things that, I think, one of the biggest things that differentiates the game. So you can assemble these things, and you end up with a little van, which represents your team that you can move around the board, and it's sort of like an NPC of yours that you can direct and use to accomplish objectives. Rob, any other things that stand out for you as immediate differeces?
Not really. There are Cold War tropes like safe houses, and you get these cool passports.
Yeah.
Z-Man did a great job. In the other Pandemic Legacies, you can basically swap characters in between games to sort of bring the right skills to the right job. And this, there's only 4 characters, but they, throughout the course of the game, you'll learn how can get different aliases in their passport. So you might start out one game as one person and then go to a safe house, and suddenly you're a different person. That gives you different skills and different things. And so we're trying to really, play off of how multiple identities and everything like that.
All right. So you talked a little bit about the inspiration for Season 0. What was the inspiration for the settings of each of the 3 legacy games?
Season 1, I remember we were working on, and then right when we were in the last half of like design or last third, it was I think Captain America: The Winter Soldier came out, and we were like, we like that vibe, like, you know, running around and saving the world and jumping off things, and, you know, slightly different, you know, factions and things like that, and so that was an inspiration. And Matt, you did a bunch of research into season 2. We read books.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that it was a conversation we had about like what would happen if we kind of inverted everything. What if we, and that was like this great design prompt, like what if we started the game and you'd already lost? What if cubes were good? You know, just trying to look at all these inversions of everything. And that led to this post-apocalyptic kind of setting where, yeah, the world has ended. You've already lost, so where do you go from there? And some of the reading there was around, I'm trying to think, I think I read Oryx and Crake and The Passage, and there's no shortage of post-apocalyptic fiction
Yeah, we
now.
talked about World War Z. We did. It wasn't
World War
quite as
Z.
much Mad Max, right? Like it wasn't
No.
that sort of thing. It was more, most of the board is empty. We wanted to really turn it around and be like, you only see this much of the map. And, you know, goes back to which way do you want to go? Do you want to go this way? Do you want to go that way? Like where is your path leading you, so that you really felt like you were rediscovering a lost world and sort of the story of what happened between the end of the first game.
Yeah. Right, you're putting together with fragments. I mean, you sort of begin to understand a little bit here and a little bit there, but you have to kind of piece it together, both the world and the story.
And then with season 0, I watched 3 Days of the Condor, some early Sean Connery, James Bond.
I read a history of the CIA and the history of the KGB, and boy, that was some difficult reading.
I kept it lighter, Matt.
Yeah.
we looked at a lot of that and said, oh, we're not going to be that dark a game, and we really went back and forth on tone. Obviously, it's a nuanced period in world history, and we weren't trying to do a historical replication. We were trying to do a sort of a James Bond version, and I think at some points we even had like lasers or something. Like, do we really go that far, like Moonrakers? And then we're like, no, that's too light. And so we tried to find something that was inspired by this time period, but obviously sort of sands a lot of edges off and makes it
the spectrum is sort of like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy to Moonraker. Like, where are we in there?
Yeah, and we had to
not quite Moonraker, right?
Not quite Moonraker, but definitely on that side. It's a little bit more of a comic book. It's a little bit more of I want to call it lighter, but a little more of an abstraction.
Yeah, certainly there's some distance there.
Well, there has been a little bit of criticism, some concerns from community members about where it lies on that spectrum and whether or not it's ignoring some of the, I guess, the bad behavior, we'll say, to understate it very severely, of the CIA in its time. What are your comments on that?
You said the CIA are the good guys.
Yeah, I mean, you are working for them, but you really don't have a lot of information. And I mean, I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that those concerns can be real. But I would encourage people to kind of check it out. It's not. I think a lot of the responses may be just a blanket reaction to the theme, and without actually understanding what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and following up on Matt, like both of us, I know, do feel bad if people would really feel like we're being, you know, jingoistic or glossing over a tough period of history, or, you know, casting modern day Russians or even like as the bad guys. Like we're trying to do protagonists and antagonists, and the Pandemic series always started in either Atlanta. I think both of them started in Atlanta, so it was going to have a sort of Western centric starting point for this one. We're also both Americans. We wouldn't have been able to tell a good story from the other way. We did play around in the middle about it not being Soviets or being like a, you know, like a Spectre type Spawn thing. And then we even had quite a robust story of it. There was the GRU versus the KGB and infighting and fractional, and got a lot more nuance. And what we discovered is playtesters couldn't follow the story. So we had to keep kind of simplifying it, you know, back up to, again, that sort of summer movie. But, you know, I personally apologize if anyone feels like we're making light of something that wasn't really the intent.
Right.
Well, thank you for that answer. On a slightly lighter subject, we've got some questions here. someone has never played any of the Pandemic Legacy games, they're wondering which one they should start with. And I think that dovetails into another good question. What do you think the ideal play order is for the 3 seasons?
Yeah, we've really opened ourselves up to this. If we had just made 3 happen after 2, there would be no questions. I'd say don't start with 2.
Right.
And after that, you got a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, if you played Pandemic and want to just glide right in to one of the legacy products, I think season 1 will glide you right in, and it'll feel really natural because it starts very similar to Pandemic. I think 2 is more of an experimental sandbox, which may be the best one to play last when you really when you get your hands dirty and you really want to play around with the. It allows you to be creative with play quite a bit. And 1 is like an adventure story, so sorry, 0. So I think it's a fine place to start there as well. But it won't. You'll have a little bit more that you have to kind of take in than you would if you started with 1.
Yeah, if you played a lot of Pandemic or Pandemic, expansions or variants, then you should have no problem starting with 0. If you played a little bit of Pandemic or rarely, you may want to start with 1 because it's the most straightforward system in the first couple games.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to
from there.
Talk about it. If you're looking for a greater variety from the base game, then maybe drop into 0. But if you want that smooth path, then 1 may be your best bet.
That said, we did write the story such as it is that 0 comes, at the end after 1 and 2, but it works in a different order. It's just
I think
things that are reveals aren't they get revealed backwards, and it'll just be different.
All right. So in regards to season 1, do you have a favorite character from season 1? Someone has mentioned that they found that playing the scientist for the first half of the game, they did that, but then they changed every month after.
I think one of my favorite characters comes out later, if that's not spoiling too much.
Don't spoil, but
and I like the NPCs in season 1, but we also finished that game in 2014. I have not done a deep dive on those characters and when they come out in a while, so I don't know if I could name off all of them off the top of my head. I don't even know if I could name season 0. We finished that 15 months ago. I don't know if I have a favorite character. Well, what we try to do is the characters are what you make of them. So like in season 1, you give them names and you get connections and backstories and things like that. And so just because you're the scientist and I play the scientist in different game, we did it right. Feel like different people with the same power in a remarkably similar picture.
And different histories too, because as you're playing, you recount all the different stories that came up as you're playing, and those get attached to the character. So it's fun to remember the situations you're in and the character you're playing in those.
All right. So another question from the audience. What are, in your views, the best practices or the best process for turning a game into a legacy version of it? And I guess kind of to give you a little more to chew on there, is it better to adapt something or is it better to start with a blank slate?
It's easier to adapt something. Yeah, I mean, I've done 6 or 7 legacy games, maybe. 1 from scratch and the rest based on existing. I find it certainly easier to start with a game because it's been tested, you can play it, you're not thinking about what's that first game like, you're like, this is the first game, maybe with 10% extra. And then you're really looking at where it can go from there. I don't know if it's the best. There have been games that have been designed, legacy games from scratch have been done very well, but it's just a harder job because first you have to make a good game and you almost have to ignore that it's a legacy game. Just make a game that's fun, which is a whole effort in itself, and then take that and then do that amount of work, if not more, again, to stretch it out and make it work as a legacy game.
Yeah, I think it's also a heavier lift on your players if they already know a game and then go get the legacy variant. They're just learning that small delta that they're excited about already, right? Because they went out and bought this because it's the legacy version of a game they already like. So you got a built-in audience, and they've got to easier time going from rulebook into the play experience. So you've got that working as your advantage. So as a designer, I think that's a big benefit. I haven't tried actually coming up with a legacy game from scratch. That feels very daunting.
I tried it once. It didn't go well. If you read the reviews.
I think it is easier to work with a very simple chassis. I mean, the simpler the game is, I think the more you can, I mean, assuming the engine is fairly robust, I think the more you can add to it.
Yeah, and that was my big thing with Seafall. It's funny, I was just going through a bunch of old files and looking at all the iteration. And the one thing that's staring me in the face now that I didn't see at the time is that first game has to be so simple. And I made the first game really meaty and then grew it. And it just led to a lot of rules holes and collision points and, you know, things that didn't hang together that well because it already started pretty chunky.
That brings up a good question. Do you think it's easier to adapt co-op games or competitive games?
I think cooperative games are easier, but Rob, you've got more varied experience in this.
They are slightly easier. They present different challenges. I mean, what cooperative games do is if the game's too easy or too hard, there's no one else at the table to balance for it. So if you have a good group, they'll never feel challenged. And if you have a group that, you know, paid money and they sit down, they play two games like we can't win, they'll get very, very frustrated. So you have to sort of build in how do you balance the game in a cooperative game because there's no other players doing that. In a competitive game, you have the problem of the campaign's going to end and usually people want to know like how well they did like a sports season. What was my final record? Who won the most games or got the most points? And that presents problems because now if you get halfway through and Justin's won 5 of the first 7 games and Matt and I have each won 1, why am Matt and I taking that off the shelf to play? Because like, Justin, you're just going to win again. But I think the harder problem to solve is the competitive one. Because it just really, you know, even if Matt and I are teaming up and we still can't beat him, we're just like, okay, well, we're not playing again. Just like you would in a regular game. Like, no, you beat us every time we play it. We're not going to do it. And much of the content gets unplayed. And that's just usually a harder puzzle to crack.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I know how to design a negative feedback loop that'll make things harder if it's too easy or easier if it's too hard. But the psychological problem of motivating a player to continue to play a game, you know, that 8th or 9th time if they have not won yet is a pretty tall order. I think there's patterns for that you can tap into. And it's a fun little space to work in, but that like Rob is saying, I think that's a harder problem to solve.
All right. Some questions from the audience here. Did you anticipate the Pandemic Legacy series being so popular?
Oh God, no.
I was like halfway through that question. I'm like, is he going to say popular? Because the answer is no.
No. I mean, we saw really good feedback from playtest groups. There's a lot of excitement about it. So we were optimistic, but yeah, no. I had no idea it was going to take off the way it did.
Yeah, no, the playtesting went well, and I know I'm looking at rose-colored glasses at this point, but I felt like it went faster than we expected. Not that we didn't have some false paths and we spent months like driving in circles, but it was only 13 months from figuring out how do we make a legacy game to turning over the final one. And I remember thinking we either missed a whole bunch of stuff or this came together really well, right? And just clicked. But I really had no idea until it came out. And then thank goodness we had already started on season 2 where we would have been completely paralyzed.
Well, I think each successive season got harder and harder to design because we didn't want to go over the same territory again, right? Covered the same thing. Each one had a narrower and narrower. And then we also had to try to live up to expectations. So be as good and also different and not repeat. So I think that's what led to the longer development times each time. But yeah, I went back and looked at the original kit we turned over, and it looks really straightforward and simple. I think each successive one became a harder problem.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Some of the initial reviews for Pandemic Legacy Season 0 have said that it is the best of all 3 of the games. I'll let you enjoy that for a moment.
Yay.
I,
I'm sensing a butt.
And then,
a huge wave of relief as some of those early reviews came in, because you're like, you never know. And
it's very
we
scary.
had been done for a while, and it's on and you're like, because trilogies are hard.
do you agree though with the initial excitement?
Oh, I love all my children. I like season 1 because it proved to be so popular, and it was just sort of surprising, and it was fun to sort of work in this space for the first time. I think it's people if they haven't played a legacy game before, we're kind of like really surprised. I like season 2 for it's turning everything on its head, kind of role playing, world building adventure. We give the players a lot of control over that game, which some people find exhilarating, some people find a little paralyzing. And I like season 0 because I feel like we took all the best things that we had learned from the other 2 and yet found a new story. And it's actually the most narrative, and probably not quite branching, but it has more branches and different stories than the other 2. So they all have like their own place, but I can't really pick a favorite.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Just right down the line, I like them all for different reasons. It's difficult for me to just point to one and say, oh, that's my favorite. I typically do have a tendency to like whatever I worked on last. So I think this follows. I'm very excited about this one in particular because we poured a lot of time, energy, and effort into this one, and I think it's showing in the final product. The graphic design team and the whole team at Z-Man did a great job on like really trying to convey that world, and I think it shows in the materials as well. So I think it clicked
and I know
really well.
you're asking us questions here, Justin, but you're one of those people because this guy jumped in and looked at the story.
Well done, Justin.
The story we were telling and the writing we did, and he's like, "You don't mind if I rewrite all of this from scratch?
Yeah,
good,
right, exactly.
Do you?"
Yeah, I made sure to say a lot of mean words about it too, to just really articulate my disdain.
Yeah.
All right. You see, you called me out now. I don't know what my next question was going to be.
The hunter has become the hunted.
All right. So assuming that season 0 is the last in the season or in the series, excuse me, do you ever consider going back to doing a legacy game, either maybe different setting or some kind of far-flung future sequel, or even shifting to a different genre, like person asks, Reign of Cthulhu or Fall of Rome, for example?
Well, one, this is the last pandemic legacy. I mean, I never say never. I mean, the Hell Freezes Over tour or something like that. But we don't feel like we have anything else to say and no interesting design spaces to play in right now. Matt and I like working together. I'm going to speak for him because now he'll look dumb if he contradicts me. And and I expect that we'll work together on various things, but I'd be surprised if it's a pandemic legacy in any
I would
genre.
just say ask again in 5 years. I'll probably have a little more emotional energy for it. These are a bit of a journey. They're a bit of a marathon. So I just want to enjoy having the 3 done for now for a little while. And then, I don't know, maybe the itch will come around again in a few years. But
I guess,
currently,
do you think you would,
currently we're done.
do you think you would approach it from the same setting and story, or like, I guess similar to how each of the 3 seasons have gone to almost entirely different genres of storytelling? Would you go someplace else, someplace speculative? I mean, I hear going into space is always the next step.
Yeah. I hate to speculate, but if we were to do something again, it would probably be pretty different, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, we'll find a shark to jump over.
Right. So you're
All
saying
right.
it's going to be Jaws.
It's Waterworld.
You already did Waterworld.
Ah, okay,
That's
I got
true,
nothing.
we did, yeah.
It'd have a lot of elves. How's that?
So this is a slightly more limited question for Rob than Matt, but what has been your all-time favorite pandemic design and work on?
That's more Matt than me, right?
Sure. I mean, you can always say which of the three, but
Oh.
we sort of covered that already.
I'm sorry, I thought you said which pandemic was my favorite to work on, and it's not for
Yeah.
Matt, it's for me, and I've worked on 3.
Well, I meant Matt and not you.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Oh,
That's
okay.
fine. I'm
That
like, I
makes
think we
much
just
more
got our
sense to me.
names,
I'm like,
our
huh.
names reversed.
I actually stopped to think about what else did Rob do. Oh, I like so many of them for different reasons. I'm not sure. I mean, these legacy games really stand out just because they're such a fun toy box to work in, and Rob's such a great partner to work with. I think those stick out as number one. I really did enjoy working on the survival series games quite a bit, primarily because it was fun to work with another designer in a completely different time zone. So I work with Jesus Torres Castro on Pandemic Iberia, and Paulo Mori on I'm sorry, on Fall of Rome, and Jeroen Domen for Rising Tide, and they all had very different design approaches. And it was just great to work with different designers and see how they approach different problems. And they're all really dedicated, great partners. So those were a lot of fun to work on as well.
So well, this one can apply to both of you, but if you could use any point in history, and I'm even going to expand this a little bit, any like intellectual property or setting to play with as Pandemic, what do you think it would be?
Oh,
If you
Matt's
had
not gonna
your
answer because
brothers.
he's probably working on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, I think that I mean, I can't talk about everything, but it is fun to look at the world and think about what you can tinker with, because the system's pretty robust. There is one that I've gotten in the back file that I'd like to see come alive at some point. Yeah, so I don't know how to answer that, Justin.
My take is not 2020.
No,
Right?
no, please no. I'd like some distance.
It has to be either historical or fictitious or both.
Right. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. How have you guys been feeling about current events in light of, the impending release for season 0, and like Matt working on Pandemic as your like the thing you've been doing for years and years and years? How do you feel about that?
It was really disorienting because I worked on Panda. I started on it in 2004. This is after SARS, and for that game, it going through that process, I always kind of felt like a pandemic is something that happens to someone else at some other time. It was not a personal experience at all. And when COVID came, I mean, my wife actually came down with it like right away in February, and it became very personal and very strange and disorienting and odd. I don't know. I don't know the right words to talk about it, but yeah, it's just very strange. And then it feels odd, like working on games that simulate it. I mean, the one bright side for me was always been like, in the games, you're actually working against the disease. Everybody's coming together to fight the disease together cooperatively. And I think that's a message that more people could use. So that's been one positive thing about it. But yeah, it's just very odd, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, well, we definitely live in strange times. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, this was always supposed to be fiction. It's been weird to have finished a game for over a year and then sort of like a real pandemic happens, and I'm looking at this game coming out where I'm like, I did a game, co-design a game with pandemic in the title. Now, luckily, it's not set in present time, and there's just Soviet agents at the beginning, and it's more of a spy thriller than a pandemic game. But it's just weird. Especially since the pandemic legacy games, you play 12 games, each one a month. It starts in January, which is this kind of where
Yeah.
this started. Like, hey, we might have a situation here. I'm like, I don't want to cosplay this. This is not a LARP. But here we are.
See here. Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely tell you it was strange within the Z-Man studio seeing some of these things. We also had, Hot Zone coming out
Mhm.
too around the same time. It was there was a lot of conversations that were held about like what can we do here? How do we make sure that we're not seeming insensitive or like we're trying to take advantage of things
Right. Yeah.
and hopefully better times are ahead. Happier notes. All right. Have you been playing any games during lockdown/quarantine?
I've slayed a lot of spires. A tremendous number of spires have been slain by me. I have been making and play testing games, and then mostly playing digital games or pick up role playing games. I have a thing where I love playing games and board games in person. Remotely is harder for me, and I've been actually distracting myself from the real world by pouring myself into work. And after 8 to 10 hours of working on board games, if I want to play a game, I've been playing pickup RPGs or something that isn't as board game focused. Or occasionally, my wife and I will play something relatively light, straightforward, like the Choose Your Own Adventure. Actually, that was Z-Man, right? Z-Man did from a couple of years back. Puzzle games, escape room games, and things like that. But I'm feeling the itch now of wanting to get some cardboard and cards in my hand and finding a way to play again.
Yeah, for me, I've been playing some games with my family. Rob, Colleen and I played Queen's Gambit not too long ago, which was
Really?
fun. I love that
had
game.
I had very little to do with that. I named it.
You named it, so
I named it, and I wrote the rule book and a couple like a little light development suggestions. But anyway, fun game.
Yeah, and then a bunch of Board Game Arena. So that's kind of odd because it ends up you play what's available. So playing more classic Euro games, which has been kind of fun to revisit some old titles. And yeah, I played the first role playing game I played in probably like 10 years last week and this week. So it was fun to come back to that playing over Zoom. Probably wouldn't have done that if we were remote, but I enjoyed that.
I guess that's another good question. Like, how has the quarantine and present situation changed how you work, on games?
Hardly at all, actually.
My day-to-day job has not changed for the most part. My play testing group on Wednesday nights, where we get together at someone's house, is sort of remote, sort of sporadic. So I've done more tabletop simulator with people. Not getting on planes as much, which I thought was great for about a month and a half, and now I miss the gaming community and seeing people. But surprisingly, and I consider myself very fortunate, my day-to-day work life has not changed all that much, other than the world's hard and sometimes I just can't get my act together to work, but that's a very minor problem.
Yeah, it's similar here. I have far less travel, and I really have started to miss that. But yeah, other than that, you really can't complain. I mean, everything can be done remote here in the office.
Yeah, how do you manage playtesting, Matt?
Well, I've always done a lot of remote testing, so I can mail games out to people and have them play them and record themselves. There are some games that that are in early stages that I can solo, and I think I'm gradually shifting into the point where I want to get some stuff either on Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia to do more extensive testing there. So I'm being pulled into that environment out of necessity. I'm not real excited about it, but I definitely see the value of it. So I'm gonna step in.
All right. Let's see here. What's a good question? I like this one. What is your favorite cooperative game that you didn't design?
For me, it's probably Magic Maze. I like that it's not terribly complicated. Everybody's involved all the time. It's got some fun little puzzles you need to work through, and the difficulty ramp is really gradual. So it's fun just to incrementally bring it up a step each time, and the total play length isn't that long. So I played a bunch of that. That's the first one that comes to mind. I played a bunch of co-ops, but that one again, first one that pops into my head.
And I have a weird condition where someone says, "What is your favorite X?" and my mind goes blank. And Justin, I will email you like Wednesday and go, "I've thought of it."
I look forward to it.
Like I'm literally going, "I've never played a cooperative game in my life. There are no cooperative games. What could it is just not what I do.
What is a board game even?
I don't even know what is.
All right, here. What's your least favorite? Does that bypass your? No.
No.
Let's not go least favorite.
No, and I wouldn't do that anyway. Someone worked
I
hard on
wouldn't
that
either.
game, and it's
Yeah.
someone's favorite game. No, if you gave me here's all the cooperative games you play, like that one, right? But I can't just do this recall right now. I know it's just a known bug with me.
I understand that. So here's a good one. Are there plans for Pandemic as a comic or TV series? If so, or if not, if whatever, I like the second half of this question better because it's easier to answer. Would you adapt from the legacy games or would you do something new?
Those are both excellent questions that I cannot answer.
Say there's some kind of this is your
I-
like fantasy pitch to what's a now I can't think of a film studio.
Universal.
Paramount. Universal.
Yeah, it's tricky because I think
TriStar.
I think the legacy games are much richer, and they would appeal to the hardcore fan base quite a bit, which would be probably where you want to hit. You know, you get this really engaged community. So I see the appeal for that right away. But then if you go broader Pandemic, then I think my argument's falling apart because everybody's just so freaking sick of broader pandemics. So.
Yeah. I can answer
there you
part
go.
of that.
There's your answer.
I can answer part of that in a very selfish way, which is if this were to happen, I would very much like it to be based on the legacy stuff because then I get to do something with it. Otherwise, it's just Matt having fun. But that's just me being selfish. But Matt and I, when we design these, we always talk about a season of television, and we really try to block it out as episodes of television. Even though we talk about movies being referenced, we really talk about what's April's story, what's May's story. Do we need, is there upbeats here, is there downbeats, like, and we try to pace things out as if we're showrunners. I guess I don't know. I've never worked in television.
Well, I think the legacy storyline would help differentiate it as well. Otherwise, you know, you could argue that Contagion's already out there and it's very much a pandemic-like story. So I don't know. That makes more sense in that regard.
Let's see. Have you found in your various efforts, has it been easier to work by yourself as a sole designer, or has it been easier to collaborate?
I think it's easier for me to collaborate. For one, it helps clarify my thinking a lot faster because I need to explain things to, if I have someone else I need to explain my own thinking to, I do a better job at journaling and then I do it earlier. And so it's easier to draw stuff out of myself first. And then there's the advantage of having someone to really call you on your BS. And it's harder to sweep stuff under the rug and say, oh, that's just fine, and so on. And then you can find people who have complementary skill sets, and then you get synergies and you bounce ideas off each other. There's so many advantages for working with a co-designer or developer. Yeah, I think it's definitely easier.
Yeah, almost all of my creative projects, whether in game design or something else, have been collaborative with one or more people. I like talking, and to Matt's sense, like if I have a spreadsheet, I can sort of map stuff out and think I'm clever. And then as soon as I start trying to explain it to someone else, it all gets clearer. And my brain starts filling in the gaps that I couldn't do when I was just sitting quietly. And I've co-designed with a handful of people or started co-designs with people, and some work better than others, not because they're bad designers, just the way that the talking and the energy goes back and forth is sometimes just easier with some than others. And hard feelings, but I'm sure they feel the same way. And some people just like to work alone. They really get great ideas in quiet. But I think Matt and I both like working with other people.
Yeah, I feel like I've been lucky in that I've had really great collaborators. I might have a different story if I was working with someone who just wanted to keep to themselves, and things fell apart. But they haven't had those experiences, so it's all been very positive.
How did the two of you start collaborating then? How did this whole mess come about?
I mean, it was really simple. I asked Rob if he wanted to make a Pandemic Legacy game with me, and he said yes, and then we did it.
Yeah, that was kind of it. It took a little while to get connected. I think you wanted to make a Pandemic Legacy game, but didn't know how to get in touch with me. And then someone at Gen Con where you weren't there said you did, and then I forgot, and then I didn't have your email address. So the actual, like, from when you said you want to ask me until we managed to get each other's email and start talking was a couple months. But once
But my memory of it was like, I finally got your email address. I emailed you. You responded right away, and then we started working on it.
Oh yeah, once we actually got touch, like, do you want to work on this? I'm like, yeah, I do. And then we started like, okay, let's meet Tuesday. And oh, you're in California, and it just went from there. Because I had been in Hasbro for 14 years. I had been out for about a year. I had been doing a lot of consulting back to the big companies like Mattel and Spin Master and Hasbro, but was trying to get stuff into market where I would get, like a royalty and had ownership and be in the hobby market. And I was like, this seems like it might be okay. It turned out to be better than okay, but
yeah, it worked out.
Yeah.
So it's been 7 years of collaboration. Any interesting moments or good stories, either from designing, playtesting, anything the game, or just random meetups in different cities? Anything?
I remember coming up with some twist to one of the storylines while eating like Phenom soup. It's at this local dive place.
Yeah, it was one of the times we were face to face. Like, I went out there for some reason. I'm like, well, I'll just work with. I'll swing by Matt's house and work with him. We went out and we got soup, and that's where it's like a big.
I just remember going, oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, I think people want like like we're a rock band, like these big knockdown stories and stuff. We if people watched us work, they would be bored to tears.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like, it's just, well, let's try that. And then Matt's like adjusting something on a card I can see on my second monitor. I'm like, you've got a widow right there. You may want to adjust the kerning on this line. And then, I'm going back and we're telling stories. Like, it is just so pedestrian at times. But I don't think we've ever gotten in a fight. I mean, sometimes like you want to do something and I don't, or vice versa, but usually it's okay, well, let's try it and let the playtesting data, take it. Or one of us.
So then some of the more memorable moments for me would be like doing live playtesting at the gathering of friends and just watching a group go through the whole arc, like just sitting there watching them taking shifts, and just observing and
or a Gen
getting
Con.
to know people.
For season
or Gen Con,
1 and 2, with the way the timing worked out, we had like a complete game, and we would find a group and put them in this conference room at night, 4 nights in a row, and they would speed run it. We would just give them pizza and beer, and they would just do it as fast as possible. And it's like one of the few times Matt and I are in the same place, and I'm always freaked out at how he never loses focus. After game 2, I'm like, this is all fine. It's all going well. And he just fills a notebook with things.
Yeah, I think the impression is that like Matt's the design guy and Rob's the story guy, but
nope. I think yes. I think.
I mean, I don't know. It's a split. There's a mix of both. Go ahead, Rob. I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to say that the actual like systems and mechanisms and story and everything are pretty much a co-design. We go back and forth, and I couldn't tell you at any point what ideas were mine and what were his. Right, like the idea of having teams. Like, we needed something where you get 5 cards of the same color. Like, at some point, one of us said teams, and we just went from there. I tend to do more of the actual writing of words, like on cards, like but not all. And Matt and I write the rule book, and Matt tends to lay out all the cards and thinks about that. So I do tend to do more words, and he does more pictures slightly at the end just so we can get stuff done. But even
Yeah,
then,
it's like the final execution, getting it across the final line. Yeah, the you're writing it and I'm blocking it out and laying out the prototype and so on. But all the generative stuff, all the stuff that kind of really matters, the design engine and all that, the stuff that you'd say is the game design, is really very much a joint process.
yeah. And even still, though, you go into the rule book and then clean up all my messes, and I go into the kit, as we call it,
Yeah.
the giant Illustrator file, and move stuff around. And
Mhm.
I don't move stuff around, you'll yell at me, but
Never
you know, finish stuff up in there.
And then the publisher comes in and ruins everything.
No. Well, we try to get, anyway, at the beginning, we try to give clean stuff to the publisher.
Yeah.
Because these games are tricky to put together and have a lot of manufacturing considerations and tolerance and translate into other languages. And my experience with legacy games has been that, you know, some graphic designers or some people get in and just don't understand the large picture, and just you're like, oh, you can't show that card there, you can't do that there. So we try to set everything up at the beginning to make it easy.
Yeah, the ZMAX tree, that was just amazing to work with. I mean, we were able to hand off stuff much earlier this time, so there was a much longer period of co-creation where the visual language and all the development was happening in parallel to the final months of design on our end. And that's a really big boost when you can get that kind of parallel development, because then we can play off of each other. We can give feedback while we're polishing up the design as they ramp up the visual design.
All right, well, we got a couple more questions from the audience, a couple more over here as well. We're coming towards the end, so if you have any last-minute questions, please feel free to ask them. In your view, which of the seasons, this is a little tricky because only 2 of them are out, which seasons performed the best, and what do you think was the reason for that? Like, which one do you think was best critically received, which is best in your view? I don't want to get too much into sales facts and figures, but what do you think? What do you think? Which one's the best and why?
Well, we sort of answered this. I said I'm not gonna talk
Maybe
about my children.
compare
Season
them.
1 caught people by surprise. It got a lot of ink. It got a lot of attention. Season 2 was a follow-up, and Matt and I basically predicted like a follow-up isn't going to surprise people as much. They're sort of saying like, well, okay, I played season 1. What are you doing different? So everything there, I'm bathed in afternoon light. I'm trying to fix this. Is
Nice
going. Yeah, I know. And you know, our goal is we want to tell a coherent trilogy, right? And we talked about that. You see it in movies. You see 1 good movie and 2 that don't quite follow up, or 2 good movies and then the 3rd one they don't know how to put it together. And we just really tried hard that if you play all 3, you get something that feels like they came from the same people in the same world, but tell different stories and all have something that you can like about them, or something you'd be like, oh, I didn't like it because we're never going to be perfect with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, season 1 kind of blew me away with how well it did out in the market, and then 2 is going to be smaller than 1 no matter what you do, because it was a sequel, and so it presumes that you've already played 1 before you can play 2. So when you're selling an expansion for a game, you might expect like 25% sales for the expansion, because the pool that you're drawing from is so much smaller, and season 2 did so much better than that. So
Yeah.
I was very happy with the performance of that as well, and we'll just see how 0 goes.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to remind people as we're coming towards the end, I'm seeing some of it in the chat, but you can earn a special badge for watching the stream. The mods posted a special badge code, so pay attention to that and get a special Twitch badge for watching. Last couple of questions. Here's a doozy. What advice can you give aspiring game designers?
Start small. Maybe start
Yeah.
by modding one of your games that you already like, and see if you can make some changes to it just to get your skill set tuned up. And if you go off to make your own game, just try to come up with something really simple, and have a lot of humility. Watch people play it and try to be quiet and see how they actually react to it. So yeah, humility, I would have to say, is like one of the best things you can have when you're play testing.
Another thing I like to tell people is all games are bad until they're not.
Yeah.
Matt and I, when we would say, I think you said, it's like, well, let's make a mess, right? And we're just going to like put stuff down, and like we get so excited in the early stage. I go, you realize most of this isn't going to be in the game. We're like, yeah, but you got to start somewhere. The trick is as you do it, you start to learn how to make them better and better or solve things faster. But they're almost never, if ever, like, I have an idea and you put it down, you're like, this is good. I know what I'm doing. It's just you get comfortable knowing that you can make it better.
Right. And the sad fact is you probably end up making, maybe even a couple dozen bad games before you actually make a good one. But you learn how to do it and you learn the process. So I mean, I countless bad games that I made before they started getting good. So don't get too attached to any one design. If you're having trouble getting stuck, just try something else.
Just move on. I mean, there's a balance there. If you're like, if every time you get stuck, you move on, you'll never get past that hard middle.
That's true. Yeah.
But I am spending a very exciting weekend looking through all my archived computer files and trying to organize them. And from 2012 through like 2015, I probably have 30 or 40 half finished to mostly finished to pitch to like prototypes and stuff. I'm like, look at this treasure trove. And I look back, I'm like, no, bad. Maybe that's savable. Bad. Yeah, that one should have been sold. Like there's maybe 3 in there worth saving. And it's just a matter of good ideas, not a good game. It takes you got to have sort of discipline and tenacity to get there.
At what point, this is another question from chat, thank you. At what point do you realize that you have a good sellable game?
When you get your first royalty check. I'm serious.
True words never spoken.
It's like you get good reviews, or the art looks great and the marketing looks great, and then you like wait a quarter or a half, and you go, oh,
yeah, that
didn't sell that well at all. Or you get another one, you go, this one's selling better than I thought. It is so hard to tell. Well, when someone buys it, that's an idea. That's a good sign that you have something that's potentially, something that's going to be a good sellable game. But I'm still, the reviews are good, but season 0, I'm like, I have no idea how that's going to sell.
Yeah, it's really difficult to know until it hits the market. I mean, I've had such high expectations for certain titles, and it's just like, okay, well, I guess that's how it went. And others like Blindside, you're like, oh my God, that's really taking off, and I never would have thought that.
Yeah, I had a game that people seemed to like, reviews were good, and I'm like, I had high hopes for this game as being like an evergreen or something. Like now, COVID has kind of messed up some production facility, but like I've made no money on it. The sales have been so low on it. I'm like, everything seems like we go together, and it just didn't.
All right, we are coming to the end of our chat, so I will say quickly thank you to both Matt and Rob for taking the time to answer all these questions. And just being swell guys, too. Is there any...
Swell. He's from the Midwest originally, so he can be swell.
Also, awesome.
Are there any shout-outs you want to make? Mention any current projects that want to throw some attention onto really quick before we sign off?
I'm spending most of my time on Restoration Games now. I'm one of the co-owners of that, working on a bunch of stuff. Thank you for everyone who basically bought a Return to Dark Tower game on the Kickstarter, working hard, spending a lot of time. Unmatched is the brand that's getting a lot of attention right now for us. It's anyone battles anyone, and that seems to be going well. So if you want to check that out, if you haven't heard of it, that would be something that'd be cool for me.
Yeah, for me, aside from season 0, which is coming up in October, I think, there's an expansion for the roll and build game that I've got with Lego-like pieces called Era Medieval Age. So keep an eye out for that. It's coming this fall.
Right. Well, once again, thank you very much. And I believe we will turn it over back to the fine UK Games Expo staff for whatever comes next. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you all for watching out there, seeing the chat. Thank you.